So it is interesting to me that this is the second of three books that you're going to do where the protagonists are male.
Mhm.
Each one is, in its own way, a situation that's a crisis that these people have to deal with. In both cases, so far, one partner is older, one partner is generally considerably younger. Um, what is it that interests you about this theme?
Well, so the way it started was with the first one, which is Riot Son. So that was inspired. I'm apologies that I scooped you last time because I was so nervous about it, but I was inspired by listening to Behind the Bastards and podcasts in that wheelhouse, including It Can Happen Here. So Robert Evans is the host. He was out at the BLM protests and was showing signs of distress just in his voice. I was listening to the podcast and I was just like, I know what's going on here. He's very upset. And he talked about having a history with stuff like PTSD. So his friends were all concerned. I'm hearing this through the radio play of podcasting. And I was out of ideas to write books for. Like, I thought I was just like, I don't know, I guess I'll just wait for inspiration to strike. I'm out of ideas. I did everything that I thought was like beyond my reach as a child. So by the time I got there, I was just like, man, it's a pandemic. I got nothing else to do. And then his distress suddenly lifted one day when he said, like, I met a riot son out in the street. And then that young man joined the podcast. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm a fan fiction veteran from the old days of the internet. And I'm just going to have to do something about that. I was called. So their age difference is what started it there. Now, I don't know anything about their personal lives. I changed names and I started launching myself into a world of fiction. So I'm not implying anything about the actual host of that podcast, but there was an age difference between the original two, and I'm like, I'm going to preserve that because I care about truth in fiction or whatever. And so once they were separated, I looked up, like, 15 years is apparently what a generation is, the gap. So I was like, 15 years, that's not so bad. Like, it's legal, it's fine. So I kept that going. And with the second book, there are a few things that will show up in all three. Like, the word Jubilee will show up in all three. A reference to Oscar Wilde is in every book I've ever written, turns out, my patron saint. The there are a few things that show up in each one because once it starts in one book, I'm like, if it carries to the second, like, go ahead and run it through the third. Let's, like, give the biographer something to do, right? For the English classes of the future. But so I kept the 15-year age gap. And for this one, it's two different generations. Now, the third book, it's going to be older and younger millennial. They're going to be on the separate ends of it. And I'm like, that'll be its own problem. With this one, it's Gen X and a solid, like, middle of the road millennial. So this one was also inspired by real life people. The Well Read podcast featuring comedians Trey Crowder, Corey Ryan Forcer, and Drew Morgan, who's the one I drew inspiration from. They all interviewed country singer Waylon Payne. And when he came on their podcast, he was new to me. I'd never seen him or heard about him once in my life, but he's very handsome. And so when he showed up and was talking about his life, he was just like, I was raised in country music and I went through some hard times with addiction. And oh, wait, my dog is interrupting me. And I was just like, I love him. It's over. He's so wonderful. And he seems so sweet. And so I was like, well, now that's the character if I've ever seen one. I felt the calling again. I was like, did I invent this guy? This is amazing. So I was like, all right, so I need a premise with him. He was interviewing with three comedians, and I was like, all right, these are two different road acts during the pandemic lockdown. Go, like, so all systems go. So that's where River Trash started. So it was just I took a look at the three comedians. I picked one. It was the ginger. That's Drew Morgan, who recently interviewed me just last week. So that was fun to be like, I fan fictioned you a little. How do you feel about it? He seemed very, I mean, as a comedian and an entertainer, they don't take offense to much, right? So all in service of the ego and the career, right? We just got to sell tickets. So right. So the age gap was already there. Waylon Payne is older than Drew Morgan, and I'm like, all right, keep it running then. And so I fictionalized them. I changed their names. I changed Waylon Payne to Whitney Thorne because the name Payne. I was just like, let's pick something that causes pain, like a thorn. And with Drew Morgan, I picked Graham Morrow. I borrowed from his real wife's name is Morrow. I wanted to keep the similar consonants involved in the names, and Drew's name is, his middle name is also Whitney, so that's how I got the one for Whitney Thorne. So, and again, I confirmed long after it was published that he didn't mind, because I wasn't really asking permission before I launch into my fan fiction. So as far as why the age difference, it burbled up naturally, and I'm like, well, I don't have a reason to change it, so I'm not going to. And so they have a couple of instances of like generational like gaps or misunderstandings, or like what is it with your generation over here. But that's truly the least of their problems half the time. So
what are the other themes that you have running through? I mean, clearly the Black Lives Matter, or whatever that rioting in the streets was, and then this second book deals specifically with COVID.
Right. So they all take place within 1 year of each other. All three of the books are going to do that. So the first one is during the BLM summer of protests. So that's pure summer. This one takes place, it ends, it's fall. They're going into the fall. So they all of these books exist in the same universe. The characters don't meet, but they could like drive past each other on the road, basically. So this one takes place just before fall kicks in. They all last about that 3 months, that season of a summer. So like everybody's just gonna have to suspend disbelief with me that like during lockdown, you're just like, look, let's just move in together, screw it. Like it was a kind of a fatalistic sort of year. We have so many of those. And so you just have to come with me that in 3 months, they're gonna get this intimate, this fast. But people were kind of desperate for connection, and for like, people were a little touch starved that year. And my mission was to kind of like preserve all of that while I was close to it, while I was within a year of it myself. And so like, while the news is fresh in my face, Riot Sun pulled from a lot of actual news stories that took a lot of research. So I'm like, before this stuff falls out of my head, because I watch the news every day and it just keeps replacing facts. So with River Trash, there's less connection to like daily news, but I like sort of like lightly reference, like hurricanes coming, like there's an election coming up, new Supreme Court member just dropped, it's not going to be good. So things like that. So like you kind of hear hints of it, like, kind of reference the fact that like they're getting groceries delivered, other people are getting shot in the streets, but they don't go outside. They're following lockdown orders, they stay in. So you kind of pointed out when you read the second one that like the first one, they're isolated sort of in a bubble when they go home from the protests that they cover as reporters in Riot Sun. In this one, they live in the bubble. Like things come to them. It's sort of the like the movie Stranger Than Fiction. You know that you're the protagonist of a novel when you can't escape the plot. It's finding you. It's going to break through the windows. So that's what happens. And because they all three are going to take place within a year, that's one of the other themes is one, to capture it all, like snow globe before it leaves my mind. And because I knew, I'm like, the world is going to fly past this very quickly. And I'm like, this is a very unique year. I'm going to just capture it before something else distracts us from it. So the next one's going to involve unionizing for our warehouse workers during the pandemic. And this one is just like, what happens to road acts, these social people, these entertainers, when they can't go out, when they have to stay at home with their own thoughts and digest that. So that's part of the other theme, kind of uniting the three.
In River Trash, you have a lot of healthcare stuff. You have intergenerational relationships. You have same generational relationships. The cousin is clearly problematic. The death of the mom, well, the suicide, I don't know if I should say it. There are lots of complications between in Ryan's family.
Mm-hmm.
Whitney's family, we don't really know much about, except for that his parents are dead before the story ever starts, and that he has a tenuous relationship with his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan is close with his family.
Graham, I think. Yeah.
Graham, I don't know, where did Ryan come from? Graham is close with
Riot's getting in your head and it's all mixing up. Yeah.
Yet he has a problem with his cousin, but with his aunt and his mother, he's particularly close at this point in his life. Is that also a way of showing conflict between them? And it gives Whitney a sense of family that he may not have had?
Well, so Whitney's got he has three people who kind of like touch base with him that like become characters that we hear from. So there's his old friend Lyle who runs like he's a very friendly, very clean living pornographer who invites them to a Zoom orgy. There's his brother who is like family, is they're close, but they're not necessarily the same kind of people. They're just blood, you know? So he calls in and just check on him and things. And then there's his friend Lexi from New York, who calls in, the drug counselor, who's just she's got time for nobody's bullshit. But, and then Graham, on the other hand, has his mother, aunt, and cousin Sage. Whitney references relationships, like he refers to them as his women, his grandmother and mother, who kind of like are still taking care of him from beyond the grave. He lives in his grandmother's house. And he keeps telling stories of his mother, especially when he meets Graham's mother and aunt, because they were fans of hers, because Whitney, much like Waylon Payne, the inspiration, he's the son of country music royalty. So like they already had country music careers, and then they had this son. He's got the family talent for music, but he's also gay. That throws a little wrench in the system, because that isn't always welcome. I mean, it was his timeline means he came up during like 90s, like, you know, like pop country and stuff. So it's not like the worst time anybody's ever had with it, but it's not the best either. But so he's very sympathetic when Graham's mother and aunt come over, because he's like, he probably misses his women, is what I assume with him. He misses having a mother around, and so he's very kind to them. He gives them pictures of his mother, since they were fans of her music and everything. And so he is, as much as he's like moving Graham into his life, he mostly moves him into his house, and he actually is the one moving into somebody else's life, because he becomes like a part of this inner circle of Graham's family, and has to deal with the fact that like Whitney is a like solidly like 10 years recovered addict from crystal meth, whereas Sage is like barely holding on, very resentfully sober, and eventually kind of goes for broke at some point, which causes tension between them, as Graham is dealing with somebody who's so comfortable in his sobriety that he doesn't feel as dangerous or as like suspicious as he is with his cousin, where it's just like, I don't trust anything she does or says. If money's missing and she's missing at the same time, she's got it. He doesn't suspect Whitney like that, but other people do. When Whitney's brother calls in, like he's just like, I don't know about you. You've lied to us before, and so like his 10 years of sobriety, for the people who remember the junkie, they don't necessarily believe everything he says, but Graham doesn't know that guy. All he knows is that this is a guy whose albums he used to listen to, and so he's pretty starstruck. But I mean, living like, you know, like knee to knee, like up in each other's business in the same house, like there's no hiding who they really are, mostly.
What role does the dog play?
Well, the dog. So that's another thing that crosses all three books. There's a pet in each one. So in Riot's Son, there's a cat who's very judgmental. Just people are moving into my house. I see. And in this one, they go and they adopt a puppy. Mostly, I wasn't planning to do a pet for each one. It wasn't meant to be like a menagerie. But when a pet showed up, when Waylon Payne, the inspiration, showed up and was like singing with his little dog, I was just like, I'm not leaving the dog out. So I have them go and adopt a puppy together. So she's there just to from a logistical standpoint, just from an artistic standpoint, like they actually sit and have like sidebar conversations with the dog. Like it's in a play, this would be them soliloquying, you know. So you go to the side of the screen and just be like, looky here, dog. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm suspicious of this guy, but is that just stinking thinking because I want to sabotage something good that happened in my life? And like that's Whitney talking to the dog. Graham also will sit with the dog, just being like, just look at how sweet you are. Like, why are you such a good person? Am I a bad person? Because you're a good creature. You're pure. You're perfect. And so they're both kind of like like going to the dog for therapy, and the dog just sits there wagging her tail, being a bit of a nursemaid when Whitney comes back from his like hernia surgery and everything. Like the dog is there to like ground people. Like you can't be too sad when the dog is so like blindingly happy all the time. And she's a honey colored dog named Honey Bun, a pit mix. So like she's there to like to help them like keep it together, like, you know, like don't be such a mess that you upset the dog. So like, I mean, and in a couple of instances when they're about to get like when they're about to be overwhelmed with emotion, it's just like, don't upset the dog, and you're like, well, of course. And then they can just hold on to it. Like, would they do it for themselves? Maybe not. Would they do it for each other? They're trying. For the dog, no excuses. No excuses are acceptable. And so she kind of serves multiple roles throughout the book.
But it's interesting because when they move into Graham's mother's house, for most of that, the dog plays a much smaller role. She's in the garage, she's caged, she is sort of put off to the side. Every now and then she pops back in, but not like how it was earlier in the book.
I think she's unneeded in those parts. It's sort of like, you know, when you saw that one set of footprints, it's because I was carrying you, kind of a thing, is what the dog's up to. The when they've got his mother, Graham's mother, Cynthia, to rely on and to worry about, she's like, I'm good. I'll be over here with my kibble. Don't forget it, and that's it. And when they aren't distracted, then they come to the dog like, can you help me with my feelings? So she's kind of there, just being her own puppy self all the time, as needed almost. And when they're distracted with other things, she's just like, well, then I'll take a nap. There's not a lot of complicated stuff in the dog. It's all projection from the people. So.
But it does seem strange that she played such an integral part, or does play an integral part, in their being together. They adopted her sort of together. They catered to her together. And then all of a sudden, she's in the garage.
She comes back in. They start with her in the garage. She's around, but I don't know. I've got a pet. Like sometimes she's everything. I wake up, I gaze into her face, and sometimes I'm just like, honey, I'm having an interview right now. Go away. But dogs they adapt to the needs. I mean, an extremely loyal dog will just be like, do you need me? Do you need me? You don't? Okay, bye. Like, I'm good. I'll be in the other room. So.
Okay, so there's nothing sneaky in there.
Yeah.
In Riot Son, it's easy to understand the political things that were going on at that time and how deeply, almost overwhelmingly, they control the way the book goes. In River Trash, it's much less obvious that, aside from COVID, Whitney's fear of getting sick and the turmoil caused by the illness, that is the theme. What does the illness sort of represent then in building relationships and then ending relationships? Well, because it changes their lives completely.
Yeah, it does. It does a lot of irrevocable changing to them. The Riot Son book, my timeline was based on the news. So there were key points that I wanted to fit. Like I kind of decided on like which days and weeks we were going to be in, and whatever was most like pressing and glaring about the news kind of dictated where I needed to move the characters. In this one, the characters are locked inside, and I have to decide, like, I had to seek around what things will come and kind of break them out of, you know, that sort of sleep that they're in, basically. So the things that I pull in are they go and get the dog. That's a little something. They have people call in from outside to participate in their life and to kind of criticize it. hurricanes come and shake them out of their house and their comfort. And then the illness itself finally shows up. The chapter titles, the parts of the book, they show that as much as it comes through the rising death toll that goes down and down, or up and up actually, because there's a Chuck Palahniuk book that does that. It's about a plane crash where the page numbers go down as a plane might. And in this instance, it's the death toll rising until it finally shows up at their door, basically, like rising water. And so, are you still there? I think it might have frozen.
I know, I'm still here.
Oh, okay, so it was just the image that froze. Cool, no problem. So once the illness shows up, there were two things that I wanted to get done. One, the harshness of COVID itself, the illness that comes for Aunt Tamala. And then we start with Whitney getting a taste of it, where he gets a hernia, which is a non-COVID related issue that is complicated by the fact that hospital beds are full up, that they have to schedule the surgery and wait for it because it's not life-threatening. By the time it reaches Aunt Tamala, now it's full-blown COVID. She disappears into a hospital quarantine ward, and we don't see her again. The next thing that happens related to that death as a consequence of it is what I remember Bernie Sanders calling deaths of despair, where her sister, who had been so close with her all her life, finally loses somebody that she just can't recover from. She's already lost her husband. Her son has already mostly, even though he's back home, he's emotionally left home. He's grown. She's done raising him. And so she looks around and decides, like, I don't need to be here anymore. My sister's gone. I should go with her. And so that's sort of where that's how this one becomes the pandemic novel, is because the illness at that point, it's basically taken away everything that Graham had. And then a hurricane comes and finishes off by snatching the house away from him too. So he starts with being the one kind of like, he feels stuck at home with his mother. And then he turns around and by the end of the book, he's never been more loose and unmoored in his life.
So interestingly, because when the book starts, he, although is pursuing a career as a comedian, he's somewhat unmoored because he lost a career, or the potential of a career, which clearly he wasn't all that interested in, because he gave up without much of a fight. You know, being a nurse for a lot of people requires schooling, requires training, and all of those kinds of things. And they're making an investment in themselves as they make an investment in their career and then in their patients. And one relatively small conflict and he's out. So it sort of shows that he's not exactly stable or determined or ambitious per se. And then he thinks that, okay, I've made people laugh, I can do this.
Yeah, so some of that comes out of this. This is pulling direct from real life. So Drew Morgan, the comedian, he had a previous life where he was a public defender for juvenile clients in Florida. That is also becoming a lawyer, going to law school. That's also the kind of thing that is like, people invest in that as a, not just a career, but a calling. Like, that's who they are in a lot of ways. So almost the way that I became a writer, like, I'm not screwing around with this. Like, you pay me or not, this is what I'm doing. So that's how some people will go into the law, but also some people, I know people who went to law school and are like, you know what? Nah, you know what? Nah. So that's kind of what's happening to him. People are kind of sold on these careers that are like recession proof almost. And then that's not a good enough reason to stay in it. And so once he gets burned, and this is similar to something I felt when I went to grad school, and I just realized like how terribly I was going to be treated. And I was like, oh, I mean, I know an abusive relationship when I see one, Jack. I'm out of here. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I like talking enough. I like being well-read enough. I wanted to be a professor, but I'm like, oh, you're not going to treat me like garbage the whole time. excuse you. So I'll go be a rogue scholar, a freelance professor. I'll talk to your kids on the internet. I don't even need you, gatekeepers. So that may be something lent from me, something lent from the inspiration source in comedian Drew Morgan. The fact that he went from one career that usually people don't just like drop, like a hot potato, and then go into comedy, which is incredibly unstable, and especially during a pandemic where like that's right when his career is supposed to be like getting up its steam, completely shut off entirely. If you were already established in your career, you could ride through it. If this was the year you took a chance on in moving to Los Angeles, you're gonna starve and enjoy the street. So like that's the kind of stuff that happens there. So that's where that came from, because I needed it to mirror the inspiration source. And the I've been listening to this podcast that inspired this the whole time. Drew Morgan's friends will say, they're like, what's wrong with Drew? He has a fear of success. That's why he's kind of like flaky with certain things. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder how true that is. This character kind of shows it. So maybe that's a little bit more argument for it. But that he dropped that career so fast, and even talks about like kind of like self-therapying himself, wondering, am I going to like welcome this pandemic knowing that I didn't fail at my career? It was taken from me by the pandemic. Is that going to be the excuse I let? Give it up, basically. The way he did with nursing. He needed one excuse. He needed the first excuse. And suddenly he was like, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me if it's going to be hard even one damn minute. So that's kind of what might be happening again with his comedy career. We don't know. They don't know 1,000 things because they're in the middle of lockdown. You're waiting until this is pre-vaccine. So they're like, well, if there's going to be a vaccine, I guess we'll just see where we are when that happens. And until then, I'm staring at you and hanging out with this dog. So as far as the character, he is a little wishy-washy. I don't know how committed he is to anything, including Whitney, which is something that they're going to have to negotiate at some point, because they're both really taking a chance on each other. And with a 15-year age gap, are you going to be in it for this man's like elder years? Like that, there's going to be a lot more where it's not going to be just like 25 years of fun and then people start aging. Like he's aging now. You're already taking him to the hospital, kind of stuff. So that's all going to have to be negotiated. You can kind of like, but I wanted it to reflect that unsureness of the pandemic itself. Like, I don't know if I'm going to have the same career, if I'm going to be living in the same place, if I'm going to be in love with the same person. I don't know if I'm going to be the same person by the time it's over. So we just all have to live with the like unsurety of that, because it's accurate to the time.
But he also calls upon his skills throughout the book. With Whitney, with his mother, with his aunt. I mean, he knows what's happening. He understands the procedures that people are going to have to go through. And he likes being in that position of being able to be helpful and knowledgeable and at a different level than the other people in the story. What does that say about him?
Probably that he just likes being listened to. He likes the sound of his own voice. He enjoys being, his mother kind of like teases him at the beginning when he says like, hey, don't go grocery shopping. I'm going to do that for you. And she was just like, I know, because you got your nursing degree once. You think you're a doctor or whatever, like calm down. And he was like, I'm going to insist even if you don't respect me or anything that I've done. But then again, as a millennial, I have a master's degree. You have no idea. Maybe you do. But like, there are a lot of people who are just like, well, why don't you have a stable career yet? And go like, do you think it's my fault? Do you think it's my fault? I'm the smartest niece you've got. Do you think it's my fault? That kind of stuff. But I have to tell that to even my fellow millennials, where they're just like, I don't know where I screwed up. I'm like, I don't think you did. Let me introduce you to what's wrong with capitalism. But that's me, because I read the news so much. He's going through some of that. Like, he has expertise. People don't value it in a lot of instances. And as much as and Whitney's got expertise too, but he's got it from from the School of Hard Knocks, basically. People take him as an authority because he's sort of been through the fire of addiction and come out the other side. So there are multiple times when Graham is like asking him for advice or permission, saying, like, especially when he gets angry at his cousin and wants to cut her off, he was like straight to Whitney, like, do you disagree? Can I do that? You're a junkie, right? Like, is that fair to do? Like, And Whitney's like, I don't want to be responsible for any of your decisions. See, I've been through recovery. I am responsible for my decisions, and other people are responsible for their decisions. That's how this goes. He's trying to keep his boundaries in place with all of that. So as far as diagnosing Graham, I think he's got symptoms of his generation, where like even stable careers aren't going to work out. Quitting jobs, like they have a complaint about millennials being like nomads. Like, why won't you people stay in a job for more than a couple of years? Like, do you think that's a choice that people make? Like, I've been trying to stay in my jobs. They boot you out. So there's that sort of part of that is true, that like some things are outside of his control, and part of it is like he knows that he's gonna let that be the story that gets told about why he didn't try that hard to keep certain things. So it's a little like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Now, in Riot Son, there was activity constantly. In this, it was in River Trash. It seems to be, and I might be wrong, a bit more psychological, more internal than external. Whereas in Riot Son, although there are certainly the internal machinations and relationships are complicated and all of that, there was so much going on. I mean, they were separated because they were out fighting in the streets. They were masked. They were this, they were that. And then they would come back together at some point. And it was almost like being taken out of the real world. And that's what they were for each other. Whereas in River Trash, as you've said, they're together most of the time. They're almost always under the same roof. And they form a very intimate relationship very quickly, but it's not really clear how deep it is. Because what are they giving up? Or is this just a way to get through what otherwise might be pretty boring times?
Right. In Riot Son, they are desperate to hang on to each other. They are in the trenches. So they go out onto the battlefield of the street every day. And when they come home to each other, they're like, oh, thank God you made it. I don't know if I'll keep fighting this war without you, kind of thing. And then these two, they're so far from the fray. They're in a different state. The last one, I didn't identify which state, but it's definitely not Louisiana. I can tell you that, because that's where this one takes place. I can rule out 2, because that's where the other books take place. But so the their fight is less. It's definitely internal. They're sort of like arguing with themselves in a lot of ways, and like sometimes causing their own problems, or just like letting stuff kind of fester. Like, I should really pick up all of that stuff that could trip me. I'm not gonna, kind of way with that. So when they come together, they're quickly smitten with each other. Like Graham, because he's starstruck by Whitney, who's like, oh, I've heard of you. You're somebody who came from somebody's. That's pretty special. And in fact, on their first night together, he was just like, like, it's not always the easiest and funnest thing to be gay, but like tonight, it got me a VIP pass to hang out with a very special man. So I'm not mad about it today. And Whitney is mostly like, he's very much, he's haunted by his age, and compounded on that is the fact that he's done a lot of damage to his body. And so he's worried the whole time, like, did my addiction leave some like landmine somewhere in me that's going to snatch my life away, that's going to make COVID kill him rather than just like sicken him for a little bit. So he's fatalistic. That is something that like a couple of the, like in Riot Son, our veteran reporter, the older one, he's afraid that he's not going to be able to keep his new love. He's very fatalistic, thinking like, there's no way I can have this. He's too young. It's just not going to work out. So why do I have to, he's still not going to let it go. He's like, I want it. I have to take the chance, but like, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to keep it. I'm just going to hurt myself by chasing it so hard. And in this one, Whitney is mostly like, he's so afraid that this actual relationship, and the fact that hanging out with Graham, that he's going to other people's houses, knowing that they've been recently infected with COVID. He was just like, am I signing my own death warrant? And am I okay with that? Like, is he really worth it? Like, he may not be into me for the long haul. Should I be sacrificing potentially my life for him? But he is also so charmed by having someone bring youth back in his life. Like, he's been 10 years sober. Those first couple of years, he was having zero fun. It was all, he had to, this was something I took directly from a book called Lust, Men, and Meth by, let's see, a doctor. I want to like give him credit, Dr. David Fawcett, PhD, talking about what you have to do to, like, if you want to really stay sober, you have to separate the meth cravings from like the sexual activity that it was so often paired with, specifically with Whitney, and apparently with a certain segment of gay men. That's what this book is about, is like how it uniquely affects this particular cohort. So he had to spend a year not having sex with anybody, no intimacy, no relationship, no sex, no masturbation even. Like, that sucks. Like, that's every day. It's like parole. You have to check in every day. You have to wear your ankle monitor. You have to eat bran muffins and go to church and be sorry every damn minute of every damn day of this year until you've starved those connections. And he's been living like that for a long time. First, to establish his sobriety, then to reestablish his career, because he had a lot of luck that he fumbled when he became so addicted. And then and now he's 10 years in, he finally has reached the window where it's just like, I got my body in shape, I've got my mind locked in, I've got my career back on track, and here comes the pandemic to ruin all his fun. He was even tempted to be like, maybe I could go out to a club again. I think the triggers of like nightlife are not so strong anymore that I could go to a club and not crave calling a dealer, basically. And before that temptation can like draw him out of his like refuge, the pandemic hits, but he does meet this young man. And so he was like, this may be a gift to me, that like, rather than go out to the bars to try and date again, which could have been an absolute minefield, here's this man delivered to your door. So he's half between like, is this a blessing or a curse? Who knows? Like, is the pandemic going to leave you not better, but like, of the, everybody has to go through it, of the people who survive it, are you going to be like better off than most or worse off than most? Because everybody's going to take some sort of hit, but there are, you know, like, some people are getting like, I lost this, but silver lining, it led me to that. And some people are going to be like, all I did was lose, all I did was take, all it did was damage me, and that's just something I have to limp with from now on. And so he doesn't know what's going on with that either. I feel like I've wandered off from the topic, but I've covered a lot of information. So.
What is your relationship with these two characters? Aside from how you discovered them and adopted them, what is special about them to you?
I felt so much more camaraderie with these two than I did with the others. The other two I admire. I think they're so cool. I would want to hang out with them if they'd even have me, like, because I'm such a house mouse. These two creatives, that's my wheelhouse. Even though musician and comedian is different than what I do as a fiction writer, it's not that different. They're both they both have a sort of like, especially a comedian, that's a talker. That's somebody who has that's the gift of gab. That's they work in words just as I do. And I'm not so bad when I talk on a stump. Basically, I can hold it together a little bit, especially when I launch into something that I've like been over in my head 1,000 times. This is how people become my friend, is, well, they'll like tap me off like, what do you think about Leopold and Love? I'll be like, I'm so glad you asked. And then go, oh, there you are. That's what's happening with these two. And I think the reason that Graham was happy to give up nursing is because that didn't grab him the way that being a comedian does, the high of being on stage. Like, saving a life, he was like, yeah, I mean, it's nice and everything, but it's also icky. So, but being on stage, like, what he says several times throughout the book is like, making a grown man laugh. Ugh, heroin. Like, and that's how I felt when I found out that when I got the book. So grateful for it. Drew Morgan read the book, he blurbed it, he interviewed me last week. He said it made him cry, and I'm like, to make a grown man cry. Like, the untold powers, like, kings don't have this. Like, that's amazing. So the fact that they're creatives and that for at least this year they are homebound, I'm like, now you're in my house. Like, now you're in my wheelhouse, because I stay inside all the time. So in writing about people who go to the protests and stuff, I'm not really that person. There are other ways to contribute to like resistance and to and the struggle and the revolution from inside. For example, I email my senator, who I'm very unhappy with, every day, just to remind him that I know what he's doing, and he should know how I feel about it. So there are things you can do in that vein, but I don't have the nerves to be out in the street, but I do have the nerves to record things and to take in what's going on around me, and then to translate that into something creative. Whitney, at one point, they have during some of their like pillow talk moments, when Grant asked him like, what's the best thing about you? And he's like, oh, music. It's music for sure. If there's anything about me that's immortal, it's that, because music is sound and sound is vibration, and that just goes until the universe ends, and does it. Like that's like when they when I tell people, when I try to like, I have a very like a counterintuitive way to rally people to like stay alive and stay in the fight. I'll be like, you have to understand that the world won't exist forever. Whatever monument you build on Earth will be swallowed by the sun and turned into lava. Do not worry about your legacy. It doesn't actually last. What you shoot into space is the only thing that can last. And people have done that. I remember like NASA doing something like, we're just going to like send messages out, which might be dangerous if there's aliens we don't know about. There's a reason perhaps that the universe is quiet and we should shut the hell up. But like, what are human beings if not people who'll be like, let's just launch ourselves off this cliff and see what happens at the bottom. That's how we do it. So the fact that that's precious to Whitney is that like, that feels immortal to me. It feels spiritual the way that like religion and church never did for him. His grandmother loved her Bible, and he's like, I don't really have it. I don't talk about it much because I sing country music. I don't want to take that, let people believe what they want about me. But he does feel spiritual about what he does. Graham also, there's something so enlivening to him about the fact that that like he can make somebody sad happy again. Like that may be actually his like that nursing instinct to heal somebody. Like maybe he doesn't want to heal the body, he wants to heal the soul, you know, by making you laugh when you're having a horrible day. And people have done that for him, and he's mostly paying it forward. And I think that's where Whitney is too in a lot of instances. Like people have been stable for me in times when I was a mess, and I can be stable for this guy while he's going through a horrendous year. Turns out, and he's not resentful about it, because he's like, I've taken enough from others, I can give this time. And for him, he feels a balance about it. So I relate so much more to what's going on with these two, just personally as a creative. And I think that might be what we all have in common. And in the next one, I'm going to be kind of like off to the side again, because they're more workers. They're in the fight. And this is also a fight, but you're also kind of like, you know, like they're hermited up. That's where the creative process is for these two, and for me as well. And so I'm deep in all of their feelings about their art and how important it is. Even if it's not tangible, it is still real. And most people who are reasonable, who are well-read, who are like in touch with their humanity will say like, nah, stories are the point of it. Like that connection, like you work hard, you can eat food and have medicine and stay alive. And then for what? And for what is that connection and the beauty around us, and noticing it and telling others about it and teaching others about it. So that's where I am. I'm in all of that.
So you would be friends with these guys?
Yeah, definitely. If they'd have me, and apparently they will, because at least one of them has already talked to me. So
have you reached out to both?
No, but I feel like Waylon Payne's got too much going on, but I've got the connection. Drew Morgan interviewed Waylon Payne. He says he considers him a buddy. So it's just, who knows? We'll drag him in. Maybe he'll make a song for us out of the lyrics at the end, if they aren't too painful to his
Well,
ear.
when it becomes a movie.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine, an indie filmmaker, I've already written a script, actually, because this is one that lends itself very easy to indie filmmaking, because it is essentially, I call it a bottle novel. It's like a bottle episode of TV, where it's like you can film in one location, basically. It's like literally rent a house, and there you go. You can kind of film in different rooms and like call it the movie. So I wrote the script. I gave Drew Morgan the privileged right of first refusal. I'm like, I'm sure it's a no, but I want you to have the the honor of rejecting it first, in case he wanted his wife as a filmmaker. So I was just like, do you want it? You don't? Okay, no, nobody's got the gas for that, no problem. I have an indie, a filmmaker friend who's gonna give it a whack, so who knows? You know, like maybe I'll come back and interview about that someday. That friend actually just signed a publishing deal for their first book, and that book is inspired by a different musician, Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan and Waylon Payne, they're touring together this year. They're out there, so you know. It's like, and 2 more degrees and we'll meet Kevin Bacon. Like everything's connected, man. So, although, see, and part of this for me is like, this book is kind of like broken containment on me. Like when I wrote the first one, I'm like, I'm just a fan of a podcast writing a book like out in the ether. But I actually did know a writer who introduced me to somebody who's within the sphere of the first podcasters. And I'm starting to realize this has been where Whitney is like 10 years into his sobriety. I'm 15 years in a writing career, and now people like return my emails, and I'm like, oh, this didn't used to be true. Like a millennial, it took a long time to build this career, but like I think it's happening now. Where like people friend me back on Blue Sky and Twitter and such. You know, like it's kind of cool. I'm like, do they see me? Have I arrived? There's no money, but you know, I guess I'll just eat the attention. It's fine. That sometimes that's enough, but truly just being involved with other creative people and having them, even if they don't necessarily like the genre I work in, to respect the work ethic and the principle behind it. That's something I have in common with every writer. I mean, I went to school with other writers, like up and coming people who are trying to do it. And the one thing I respect is that if you're doing the work, you're doing the work. The one thing I do not respect is people like, I could write a book. I'd be great at that. I'd be like, oh, you could. Well, I could be a doctor. I could be a ballerina, but I'm not gonna. And actually, that isn't true. So put your money where your mouth is before you talk about it. So that is something that, like I said, that I have in common with these characters, and that definitely pays off with this one in special ways that other books haven't.
So the real people interest you just as much as your characters.
Real people are characters. Like that's
No, but they're not your characters.
Right. Well, that's what happened. Is I saw a fascinating character in Waylon Payne, and I was just like, well, I can't have that outside of my wheel. I'm dragging him in. Like that's what happens. And with this set, and this is kind of unique. So my previous books, like I have a 5-book YA series that was all me trying to pull something out of myself, which is difficult when you're a teenager. That's when I started writing. It was like 18, 17, 16. If we go back to the fan fiction years, like an actual like tween, like, but my first books, it was trying to pull life out of somebody who had barely lived any of it. And then I went back to a fan fiction bent with writing about Leopold and Loeb, who I was obsessed with the case, but like they're long dead. That's nothing to do with me. Like that's not something I can touch as close. I can touch the other fans of it. I can touch other scholars, but not the people themselves involved. And same with my Sherlock Holmes pastiche that came out of my English literature degree. My deep regard for Oscar Wilde, who's never led me wrong even once with his sometimes contradictory advice and example. But that's also something I couldn't really touch. That's just me picking up public domain characters. And in this one, these are characters like I said it during our Riot Sun interview where I'm like, this is the work that's connected to my own time. This is my Gatsby, basically. Like this is me writing contemporary, whereas before I was writing sort of like either like completely imagined beside and outside of myself, or like I'm pulling from the past. This time I'm pulling from real life, present life, and I'm snatching character where I find it. And I kind of like gave it up to the muse after I finished the Sherlock Holmes one. I'm like, that was my last idea from childhood. Now what do I do? And it's just like, open up and wait, basically. And so like I was in my podcast era, and so I waited for something to grab me, and it did. And at this point, I'm no longer afraid that something won't grab me. And in fact, I even went back. I had the honor and privilege of having fans of the first Leopold and Loeb book, Homo Superiors, reach out to me. It was at least 2 people who were like, could you please write a sequel? And I was like, nobody wants a sequel to Leopold and Loeb. Like, we want to spend 30 years in prison with them? And they were like, yes, we do, actually. And I was just like, if you're sure, I'll do it. So I've actually written that book. It's scheduled to come out eventually. And I even got inspired to write the 3rd installment for that, which was the post-parole Puerto Rico years for Nathan Leopold, where he's just, he's a character, but he's a very distasteful one in a lot of ways. But I'm not afraid. So So that's what I'm doing. I keep pulling character from life, and I mentioned in my interview with Drew Morgan talking about I come after Oscar Wilde. I also come from the like William S. Burroughs like American writer school of like just steal shit, bro. Like, so speaking of junkies, right? But the he was very much interested in like go ahead and steal what isn't nailed down. There is none of this purity of like your own story and stuff. Like rip shit off, bro. And that got into my formative years as well. So when it comes to character, if they're not my characters and I like them, they will be my characters. That's what happens next because I'm taking it. So and you can thank Burroughs for that, if that answers the question.
So we are winding down the hour, and I want to thank you. Thank you for the book. It's a fascinating look at two people coming together. I also find it interesting that you have chosen to write about gay men. You are clearly not a gay man.
No.
And the characters that your characters are based on are not necessarily gay men.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's an interesting twist that maybe next time we'll get to as to why is that. But now I have to say thank you. And I'm Robert Kesten. This is the author interview series that we do at Stonewall National Museum, Archive, and Library. We're based in Fort Lauderdale. Please visit us on our website. And if you're in Florida, come and visit. Our museum has a number of interesting exhibits. We have the largest LGBTQ library in the world, and we have a fairly amazing nationally collecting archive that has many items that are one of a kind that you will not find anywhere else. And our programming is explosive in the sense that it deals with today, but it deals with today based on why history is so important. That if we understand history, if we learn from history, the world going forward will be a far better place. And thank you all again for joining us. And thank you, LA, for participating once again in these conversations. Have a good night.
Good night.